So I don't know if you're aware or not, but apparently there is a big football tournament that is about to start. And you may have seen it in the press. I don't know, there hasn't been that much coverage of it, has there? But putting the joking aside, yes, it's the World Cup. It's absolutely huge, and it's a great opportunity if you're a Betfair trader. And I know there have been lots of videos and articles done, but what I wanted to do for you is to appraise and show you what's happened in previous World Cups to give you a steer on what I think will happen in this World Cup. Anyhow, let's have a look at those statistics. Please like and comment on the video below. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them in the future. So my first World Cup was in 1978, and when you look at each World Cup, you always have a memory, and I think you can summarise most World Cups with one word. So 78 for me was Gemmell. England didn't play, Scotland did, and Archie Gemmell scored that wonderful goal against the Dutch. 1982 would be Keegan, Mr. Sitter, against Spain. 1986, the hand of God, so that would have to be Maradona. 1990, Gaza. 94, I think the word would have to be absent, because England weren't there in 1994. But and then 98, we've got Owen scoring that wonderful goal against Argentina. But all of my memories of the World Cup are punctuated by sort of specific moments that occur. 2006 was Joe Cole scoring against Sweden. I remember it so well because we were in a pub, the ball came out of this Swedish box, and everybody just went, "Shoot!" And he did. For once in his life, somebody shot, and it flew in the back of the net. 2010, Vuvuzela. You can bring all these memories come flooding back whenever you look at each individual tournament. And of course, we look at the last tournament in 2014, and there are still three things fresh in my memory from 2014. One was Suarez biting Cellini, and if I remember it so well because Betfair for once had a sense of humour, and they actually put and changed their logo immediately after the incident, which I thought was quite funny. But also, when you look at the World Cup, especially 2014, I mean, 7-1 to Germany was the most remarkable match I think I've ever seen, because everybody thought that Brazil were geared up and were going to win the World Cup, and excuse the pun, but Germany absolutely mullered them. And I wonder where that expression comes from. I'm going to have to Google that now and figure out exactly what that is. But it was pretty remarkable, and I just remember watching that whole match completely open-mouthed. It was just, I've never seen such a complete and utter humiliation of a team. It was incredible. You also get memes that come out of the World Cup. So in 2014, it was things that Tim Howard saved. That was absolutely hilarious. And, you know, I've forgotten prior World Cups exactly, you know, some of those moments from there, but generally speaking, it's defined by a particular moment. So of course, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing what that particular moment will be. Will it be Harry Kane lifting the World Cup with an unexpected England win? We can but hope, can't we? And it looks like we're not going to be able to see the World Cup in the UK for a very long time. So we're talking 2030, 2034 could be the earliest we could ever see the World Cup come to the UK. So I think in 2026 I'm going to be heading off to the US, Mexico and so on to watch it over there, because it's one of the things that I still haven't managed to do that I really think that I need to do. Anyhow, let's park all of that. I don't know why I'm rambling about it. It just popped into my head when I was thinking about previous World Cups, and I'm generally getting overexcited, only to be let down within 10 days or so. So yeah, I apologise for that, but I do, you know, it punctuates my life. Those particular moments, and this year we'll no doubt do the same as well, hopefully for the right reasons. But from a trading perspective, one of the problems that we have is that there aren't actually that many World Cups that have taken place within the sports trading universe so far. So 2006, 2010 and 2014. I've got data on all three because I've been around for all three. And some common themes sort of tend to run through them, and things that I've seen. The problem is, because we've got such a small sample size, you can't really believe, if you're a statistician, that you can extrapolate trends from there. But there are things that seem to happen. So I'll give you my opinion on the way that stuff happens and what I think is the reason behind it, because it's important to not make up those connections, and it's important to have some logic that runs through it. But the first stat that I'm going to throw at you is that the World Cup is absolutely immense. It's huge, it's absolutely massive. And you would have known that already, but you wouldn't have known the number. So how much do you think was turned over on the World Cup in 2014? What was the total matched bet turnover for all World Cup markets in 2014? The total is 3.3 billion. So it is very, very big. And that means that the volume will be big on an individual basis. And you know, there will be lots of money sloshing around all of the markets. So it's almost certain that you'll find a market that you like, that you can trade, that's liquid enough to do interesting things with. But as with a lot of things, if you're used to trading domestic football and then suddenly you turn up at the World Cup, it's going to feel very different. It's like looking at a Lingfield on a Tuesday evening in the summer and then comparing it to a Royal Ascot if you're into racing. They are very different, and they behave slightly differently as well. So things that I can do on domestic football I can't do in the World Cup, but there are things you can do in the World Cup that you can't do on domestic football. But it's all geared around volume, volatility, and the way that the markets behave. And there are two different sort of general approaches, I think, in terms of the way that you should look at these particular markets, because they do behave differently. I've got some notes here, but if we look at the group stages in 2014, each match before the match started turned over about 6 million. Now obviously you have to add the in-play totals on there. We'll have a look at those in a second. In the quarters it was about 8 to 9 million. The semi-final was about 9 million, and then the final, or the semi-final between Brazil and Germany, because Brazil, or the host country, was 12.5 million before the match had started, and then the final was about 20 million. So that gives you an idea of how the market sort of scales up and goes from there. The biggest group game, it's not a trick question this, but have a guess which match was the biggest group game of 2014. You probably won't even remember the fixtures. So I'll narrow the focus for you even more. Which country who was playing in a group match had the most amount of money matched before the match had actually started? Have a guess. Think of one of the countries in the World Cup in 2014, and then say, yep, that would have been the match that had the biggest amount matched at the group stage. It was England v Italy. So one of the themes that you find is that typically, and it is slightly unusual, but sort of, you know, I suspect that this is the reason. But if you look at the European teams, the big nations like Portugal, Spain, Germany, and particularly big betting countries like the UK, then what you'll actually find is that they tend to attract most of the volume. So if you actually look at, I'm pretty sure I've got a graphic of it, if you actually look at ranking the amount of money that was matched per team, and then you plot the group stages and the semi-final and, you know, where they got to within the competition, you'll find some of those European teams towards the top of that list. And if you look at the bottom of that list, it's countries who are in different time zones, who don't have that much betting activity, don't have betting exchanges, and so on, which sort of makes sense really. So it tells you immediately that, you know, the big matches are going to be later on within the tournament, but also even earlier in the tournament. The ones that will bubble to the top of the list would be those big footballing betting nations. That sort of makes perfect sense really, doesn't it? I think you could probably work that out without looking at a spreadsheet. But there's confirmation for you, Nero. That is definitely the case. The money tends to accrue at peak viewing times as well. So if you get an odd starting time in the middle of the afternoon or late at night or something, that can tend to affect liquidity. But that early evening game, especially if it's an England match, will attract an enormous amount of liquidity into the market. Now, I'm not going to trade on England matches. I may trade pre-off, but I'm not going to trade in play, simply because I'll probably, you know, I want to enjoy it. I'm going to have some people around, we're going to have some beer, we're going to watch the match, we're going to moan like anything, and then celebrate a glorious victory on penalties, not. But yeah, so I'm not going to get involved in it from that particular perspective. I would happily sacrifice watch it, a little bit of money to be able to watch England. In fact, it would have been nice perhaps to go to Russia. I've got some friends who are going, but such is life. That's some of the sacrifices you have to make. I will get the opportunity at some point. I'm pretty sure of that. So yeah, England matches. and peak viewing times. And where you get multiple matches going off at the same time, liquidity just gets thinned out of it. So you're going to have to pick and choose your targets carefully there. So if you've got many matches, at or around the same time, then the liquidity is going to thin. The money will get spread across multiple markets. You don't have to focus on the one as detailed before on this particular video. So yeah, pre-off you tend to get some very big markets. They tend to generate a lot of liquidity. I've just been having a look at the first match that's about to take place, and if you look at the ladder, you'll find there's lots of money stacked above and below it, and most of the money is being traded in around a 3-tick range. It's just bumping up or down, and that's typical of the sort of markets that you tend to get at the World Cup. So what I tend to do at the World Cup is I shove a load of money into my account, and then I'll actively trade pre-off quite aggressively. And by aggressively, I mean use lots of money. Because the market always knows better than you, so you can't attempt to influence that. However, if there's going to be a lot of activity in the market, then that will tend to make the markets just that little bit more tradable. Tradable in the sense of if something goes wrong, the price isn't going to go flying away from you. So a big difference in the World Cup is obviously team news tends to be pretty limited. So what you tend to find is the markets are very stable. They're as flat as a pancake for a long period of time, unless if there's some unusual team news. So in 2014 we had an injury to Neymar, and that did cause the price to spike. But generally speaking, both sides are going to be putting out the best possible teams, and the market will discount the chance of them winning fairly accurately, and there won't be much of a difference of opinion, especially because it's on a neutral ground as well. So you tend to find the predominant characteristic is the market tends to be pretty flat. Tends to be pretty flat. I'm going to explain why in a second. If you look at the amount of money that's traded, about 40% of total money within the market is matched pre-off, and about 60% in play. So if a market does 4 million pre-off, you can expect it to reach about 10 million by the end of the match, subject to what goes on within the match, because if the match swings backwards and forwards between the two teams, the volume will inevitably rise. So yeah, there's quite a few different characteristics there in terms of the overall numbers that you expect to see at the World Cup. The biggest market is always match odds, and then over and unders, and then correct score, and there's a whole plethora of other markets behind there. One thing that's unusual about this year, well, there are several things unusual about this year. Betfair have multiple Asian handicap markets, they have goal line markets, and we also have VAR, we have video refereeing. So one of the things that you'll tend to see this time round is that those markets may get liquidity to the detriment of other markets, but VAR is going to throw in a whole gamut of possible opportunities. I think the variability within individual matches in play this year would be much higher than it has been before, so I expect the in-play volumes to be a bit higher. But my angle on VAR would be that some unexpected things are going to happen. So every time that the video ref is called and the ref draws a rectangle in the air, then I'm going to be looking to jump on the back of that, because I think that people who are trying to get ahead of the clock will probably jump on things really quickly and take a little bit of time to adjust to VAR. So I'm willing to have a go at that. I'm going to throw a bit of money in there and see what happens. And I think there'll be a few really, really odd prices matched when a decision is not absolutely clear, because the only way to beat the in-play timer is to anticipate when there's a strong attack, and then if the goal goes in and the market suspends and clears out, and then it goes to the video ref, that's going to be great fun, I should imagine. And you would imagine it's going to happen a few times as well. But very early on, I think I'm going to be watching those markets very, very closely, gathering some data, just seeing how the market reacts when those sort of situations develop. But I think that will be a big opportunity. But there are plenty of opportunities within there, so let's talk about a few of those. So one of the things to note about the World Cup is that obviously the liquidity is very, very high, but everybody has limited banks in which they can use, and as you know, I will tend to switch sports depending upon where I think the best opportunity is. So if I see a football match lasting 90 minutes, what I actually see are 9 horse races 10 minutes apart, and I suggest that you look at things the same way in terms of where you want to pick and choose where your targets are, and obviously you'll perform differently at different sports. So I expect to get something out of racing, I may not get something out of football, but I'll try and get them to line up. Now you see this occurring within the market as well. So when England are playing, or when there's a big World Cup match on, you see the liquidity drop off a bit on other sports, and you see the liquidity drop off a bit on racing. So yeah, keep your eye, even if you're not trading the World Cup, on looking at what other sports events are in and around that particular time, because you may have a knock-on effect on there. However, a few years ago, what I actually did was I mapped out to see where the biggest drop-off is. And the interesting thing is, when there's a major football tournament on, you tend to see a drop-off on tennis. Now, some of that may be a bit coincidental in terms of the timings, because typically you tend to see that, but you actually see that football and tennis tends to negatively correlate in terms of when there are major tournaments on, which I thought was quite interesting. I've got a graph from it somewhere which I'll put up, but you'll actually see that there's a correlation between, or a negative correlation between turnover on tennis and turnover on football. So yeah, you will notice the markets go a little bit weaker, especially during the England games, because a lot of people will take the focus off of certain markets to tune in to whatever the big World Cup match is that's currently taking place. So there are lots of opportunities within the World Cup, and we need to go through them and talk about things that will and won't work. But the thing that I always do during the World Cup is I'll trade pre-off, simply because, as I've mentioned, there's loads of liquidity in the market, there's loads of money coming through, so it gives you the opportunity to effectively trade that. And why not do that if there's enough money there? Now, there will be loads of money on either side of the book, but you'll be surprised how quickly it does eat through. And typically, the risk is lower than you would have with traditional matches, because the market isn't going to move that much. So every World Cup that I've traded so far, I've done pretty well at, and I'm just trying to get some of those bigger totals done pre-off. And the advantage with doing that is when you get some bigger totals pre-off, then you can just take the money and play and do whatever you like with it with very little risk. So throw abandon to the wind and just do some ridiculous things if you really want to. But it's nice to hold on to that money anyway. So yeah, I will trade most of those markets pre-off, and it works pretty well. I've done it for many years now. Every time that there's a big championship tournament around, I will be active in the market that way. Although typically I don't tend to trade England. Why? Well, because I'll be wanting to watch them and enjoy the experience, if you can call it that. So I'll probably have a few friends around, a few beers, and I will probably forego the opportunity to trade England, including pre-off, because it's, a bit rude, isn't it? to sit behind your desk and then just nip downstairs as the match kicks off. Who knows? Maybe I will get the opportunity to do that. We'll have to see. But probably not on this occasion. But I will have a look at the England markets, and there is a trend. If you do want to trade them, and you're not going to be watching them and getting drunk, don't trade drunk. In that, when you look at, if we go back to that wonderful campaign that we had in 2014, where we didn't win a single group stage, we had a 2-1 loss to Italy, a 2-1 loss to Uruguay, and we drew 0-0 with Costa Rica. What a fantastic set of results that was. However, if you look at the pre-off graphs, if we look at the match against Italy, can you see there's a pattern of activity here? England were backed quite heavily before the start of the match, and then if we flip this and look at the Uruguay odds, or the England odds against Uruguay, I should say, you can see pretty much the same thing happen there. So it seems to be, if you're an England fan, would you back the opponent? No. Would you back the draw? Nobody's interested in the draw. So would you back England? And what seems to be happening more often than not is people sort of go, oh, you know what, we could win this. And then the money goes down. So it's interesting, but England do predominantly get backed. And that's something to look out for if you're going to actively trade. But generally, you don't tend to see that much movement unless there's something unusual going on within the market. Now, what about backing a big outsider and trading them back into the market as they progress through the tournament? How does that work? Well, the interesting thing is it actually works pretty badly. So it's just a word of warning, basically. If you're looking at a tournament like the World Cup, it's seeded. So, all of the top teams, they've lined them up across the group. So they've got weak teams to play, and then they can progress to the next round and so on. So that when they reach the final, you've got two decent teams that people will want to watch. There'll be a big TV audience, the sponsors will be happy, FIFA will be happy for obvious reasons, and the whole merry-go-round continues. So these tournaments are geared up to granting the prize to one of those top teams. It's incredibly rare for a team to come from nowhere to be able to get through and win that tournament. It's not impossible, but sort of a Leicester scenario is much harder. in this scenario because it's seeded. So the idea is that as the seeds progress, they knock out all of the outsiders. The way I would put it is seeding crushes outsiders. It's the same as in tennis. You have the two top players on opposite sides of the draw with the intention that they'll meet in the final, and pretty much the same thing happens at the World Cup, but obviously with football teams. So yeah, say that team does manage to get through the group stages, then they'll have a bigger team to meet in the next round, and an even bigger one in the next, and then an even bigger one in the next. So it could be that Iceland get through the group stages where they then meet Argentina, Germany and Brazil. So the problem is the market will always discount that. It will always discount the fact that they've got no chance. So you may see the odds shorten, but probably not dramatically. It does happen, but it tends to not favour that type of strategy. Now, if you and of course the eventual winner will probably come from that group of the top 5 to 10, and will be 100% of the market eventually. So can you see what's happening there? Every time each of those teams progresses, they become a bigger chunk of the entire mix. I did make really detailed notes on this in 2014, but it's so complicated to explain the correlation and the way it works. I don't think it's going to fit in a video at all. But just wanted to warn you about what happens in seeded tournaments. So when you look at that, that's a bit annoying. However, in individual matches, they do tend to create value. So, okay, they may get out of the group stage and then get knocked out at the next level. But on an individual basis, when you look at teams that aren't expected to do that well, they do surprisingly well. But on an individual match basis, if you look at the individual matches and you compare the chance of them actually winning with actually what happened, you tend to find there's a bit of a discrepancy there. So I've actually done a spreadsheet that actually has all of that stuff listed. And it's too complicated to explain how these numbers have come about. But basically, it's how much they over or underperformed. And if you look at the teams at the top of the list, they tend to be teams that were, bigger outsiders. They tend to, if you're betting on them or trading on them during a match, they tend to create the most amount of value. And at the other end of the scale, you'll find teams that are generally considered to be higher rated that didn't perform as well. And that seems to be a theme that runs through the World Cups. I've seen this over the 3 tournaments that I've gathered data on so far, and I suspect that that's going to continue in this particular tournament. Pretty sure it will continue. There'll be an outsider that will qualify from the group stages unexpectedly. But that sort of brings us neatly onto the to qualify markets. Now, you tend to see what I've just said replicated within the to qualify market. So laying teams who are at very, very short odds to qualify very often produces good results. And when you look at it, the way to look at the to qualify market, they say group stages, and it is a group stage where they're playing several teams. But I guarantee you that the coaches of those smaller nations who aren't expected to progress will be saying to their team, well, look, okay, we have to play each of these teams and the best ones go through. But if we get a result in this match, then we only need a draw in the second one, and perhaps we can pull it off in the third, and then we're through. So their mentality will be like that, and they're going to be viewing it, and undoubtedly they'll be saying, look, it's not a group, it's 3 knockout matches. That's the way to approach this match. So you can see how that would work, and that produces some unexpected payoffs in the to qualify market. Now, I've got a spreadsheet that I've got on the to qualify market, so I think we should probably just have a look at that, and I'll show you what happened in 2014. But also look at the video that I did in 2014 about 2010, and you'll be amazed at how similar the two are, and how the data between the two look so similar as well. Anyhow, let's have a quick look at that spreadsheet. So if we're going to look at the spreadsheet, I should explain exactly what you're looking at. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? But on the left hand side here, we have the minimum odds that were traded in the to qualify market over certain groups. And on the right hand side, we have the odds at which they started to qualify at that particular group. So, for example, in Group A in 2014, we had Brazil, went off at 109 or thereabouts, and you can see that they qualified because we have a 1 above saying that they qualified, and they traded at odds of 101 because they qualified. They would definitely qualify, and therefore the odds would eventually end up at 101. But if we look at Croatia, they were 2.4 to qualify, so you can see the market thought it was going to be Brazil and Croatia, and you can see Croatia traded as low as 145, but they're under this column here, which is 0. They didn't qualify. So you can see here Brazil and Mexico qualified, but Croatia trading at 145
did not. So if we go down this list here, you can see Spain were 1.3 to qualify, and they reached a low of 112 and didn't go through. In Group C, 109, 175. Group D, which was England's group, you can see Costa Rica were 15.5 to qualify. They qualified. Italy were 151 to qualify. They didn't qualify. England were evens to qualify. They didn't qualify. And you can see they traded at a low of 139. So, and if we go down, the theme sort of continues here. Ecuador 1.4, they reached a low of. And the two favourites did qualify in that group. Two favourites in Group F were Argentina and Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think they was their proper name in that World Cup. You can see here that Bosnia traded at 137, but didn't qualify. Portugal in Group G, 148, didn't qualify, and they were 1.7 to start. Germany did go through, obviously, eventually won. And then we can see here that Russia were 1.3, traded at a low at, and they were 158 to start with, and didn't qualify as well. So it's interesting to see how often teams at very short odds don't qualify for the next stage at the World Cup. And the interesting thing is this is a carbon copy. If you look at the video I did in 2014 about the 2010 World Cup, pretty similar as well.
So one of the things that permeates these markets is incentive to score. I have done a separate video on incentive to score, which if you do go into YouTube and type in BetAngel incentive to score, you will find that. But there is a huge incentive to score, so the markets are very, very variable. Unexpected payoffs occur much more frequently than you would expect because you're down to the last 15 minutes, you know what's happening in the other match, and you've got to score a goal to either draw, to win, or to change the goal difference. And you will go off and do that because you're only 15 minutes away from abject failure or becoming famous or a meme on the internet through that wonderful goal that you scored or something like that. So incentive to score is very high, and teams and players will do everything they can, apart from England. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe they did that in 2014, but maybe this year it will be different. This time it's different, as they say. But yeah, the incentive to score is huge, and therefore teams will go all out for that. And also the minor teams will be much more likely to do that as well. So if you think about it, you know, they go out in a blaze of glory having tried everything, or perhaps they do get that goal, they go through, and then suddenly they're national heroes. It's a much harder for the big teams to be able to do that. They don't. If you look at the way it's geared up, and you would have seen this in previous videos that I've done, it's all about fear of loss. The smaller teams at bigger odds have got nothing to lose. If they go out, that's what was expected. If they go through, they will be absolute heroes. If the bigger team, who with all of the star players that's expected to qualify, slips up and concedes a goal or makes a mistake or tries to get an extra goal and causes a problem at the other end of the pitch, they won't be heroes, they'll be zeros. And we'll get a lot of flack for that. So yeah, think about it. When you're watching a match, and the staggered starts sometimes can help improve this. You know, if there's something that's happening somewhere else that requires something to happen somewhere else, that can increase that incentive, and things can go, you know, it won't happen in every match, but if you persistently follow that strategy of looking for those opportunities, then overall you'll probably get a payoff. So yeah, big teams will suffer performance anxiety, smaller teams won't have that at all, and there'll be a massive incentive to score in a number of different places, and the staggered starts will very often create those incentives as well. There was something I captured at the last World Cup where it was saying, well, how could they qualify? And it was, well, if this team does that, and if that team does this, and this happens, and that happens, and if they do that, then this happens, and this is the situation that it unfolds. Sometimes it can get quite complicated, but a lot of the time it's quite simple and easy to understand how things will progress from there. So yeah, keep your eye out for that. And you tend to see that manifested very well in the to qualify market. So that's a market I'm very interested in at the World Cup. So yeah, there's a few trading ideas for you there. And, you know, to summarize some of those, the reasons that I like the World Cup and I get excited about it is because it's huge. 3.3 billion was traded in 2014. Massive liquidity gives you scope to do many different strategies, and some that you probably wouldn't during the domestic season. There's highly variable results, and that's driven by the incentive to score. Incentive to score is absolutely immense at the World Cup, and then teams will do anything like it, like for example biting an opposing defender or saving the ball with your hands. Strange things happen, and the thing about being highly variable is this year we have video refereeing, so that's going to create all sorts of variability. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Teams suffer from performance anxiety. That can be a problem for teams as they progress through the tournament, or at certain stages, such as penalties. But of course, we also have penalties in the World Cup, and they can be great to trade as well if you've never traded those before. I probably need to do a separate video on those. The staggered timings and the way that there's an incentive to score or not to score improves the situation as well. And then when we look at England, you get this classic herd mentality of England predominantly being backed in. Probably will happen again this year. I'll mention or talk about it on social media or on the forum when we begin to see what sort of patterns develop this particular year. But some of these things I'm expecting to repeat. I hate to extrapolate trends, you know me, I'd hate to do that, but there does seem to be a pattern of behaviour. We've only really had 3 tournaments on Betfair and on Betting Exchange World since they began, so it's difficult to say whether these are characteristics that will remain forever, but I sort of suspect if you look at the detail behind some of these things that will probably be the case, and that's exactly how I'm going to approach it anyway. So if you approach it in the same manner as me, then we'll both be in the same boat together effectively. So yeah, looking forward to the World Cup, looking forward to Harry Kane lifting that trophy on that final match. And then I woke up. But I hope whichever team you're supporting and whatever you try and do at the World Cup, and whether you choose to trade it or just watch it, I hope that you have a really good World Cup.